What happened when an undercover CEO watched his staff humiliate a job applicant, only to discover she was the top candidate he'd personally recommended? You're about to find out. Welcome back, you wonderful, kind-hearted listeners. Your love for stories about justice, redemption, and real character keeps this community thriving. Today's tale isn't just about a diner. It's about dignity, hidden strength, and the moment one woman's quiet courage changed everything. If you've ever believed that kindness matters, that second chances should be earned, and that real leadership is about heart, this story will move you. Let's dive into the unforgettable journey of Rachel Grayson. The desert wind howled outside as the chipped door of the Copper Rose Diner creaked open. A few heads turned, some out of habit, others out of curiosity. In walked a young woman who didn't seem to belong. Not in this weathered slice of Americana, where truckers, retirees, and lifelong locals sipped burnt coffee and traded stories across faded booths. Rachel Grayson stepped inside with hesitation, the dry heat behind her giving way to the greasy warmth of the kitchen and the tang of fryer oil. Her boots, once leather brown, were now dulled and cracked, and her jeans sagged slightly from wear. She clutched a manila folder to her chest like it held her last ounce of hope. Her hoodie, 2 sizes too big, was pulled tightly around her, though it couldn't shield her from the stares. Behind the counter, 3 teenage staffers barely concealed their amusement. Chad Brewer, the line cook with too much gel in his hair, nudged the girl beside him. Amber Shaw, hostess with acrylic nails and a sharp tongue. "Place just got a whole lot more homeless," he muttered. Amber smirked, flipping her hair as her eyes scanned Rachel's worn-out clothes. Eli Carter, the dishwasher, leaned forward from the sink window. "Bet she's here to ask for leftovers," he said, his voice a stage whisper. Rachel ignored them, choosing instead to study the menu above the register, though her eyes barely moved. She wasn't hungry, just gathering courage. The diner, with its peeling wallpaper and flickering neon sign, felt colder than the Arizona wind that pushed her in. In the far booth, a man in his late 50s sipped coffee slowly, unnoticed. Dressed in flannel and worn jeans, he looked like any tired traveler. But Douglas Reed saw everything. The slights, the looks, the way Rachel stood a little straighter, as if daring herself not to crumble. He knew this location well. It was his. One of many in the Copper Canyon Diners franchise he'd built from scratch. Today, he came unannounced, hoping to check in on operations. Instead, he was about to witness something far more revealing than kitchen efficiency or customer flowcharts. Rachel took a breath and stepped toward the counter, the teens prepared to enjoy the show. But none of them noticed Douglas gently setting his cup down and reaching for his phone. He wasn't texting the district manager. He was documenting everything for what would come next. Rachel approached the counter, her manila folder held firmly in her hands, its corners already worn from nervous handling. She offered a quiet smile to Amber, who didn't bother to return it. Instead, the girl raised an eyebrow and said, "You lost, sweetheart? This isn't a shelter." Chad let out a snort from the grill, flipping a burger with unnecessary force. "Nah," he said, loud enough for customers to hear. "He's probably here to ask for free coffee. Got that 'please don't make me pay' look." Eli, half drying his hands on a dirty apron, chimed in from behind the drink station. "Bet she printed that folder at the library. Smells like an interview, probably for mop duty." The 3 teens chuckled among themselves, trading jabs like bored school kids who mistook cruelty for humor. Rachel's face flushed, but she said nothing. "I'm actually here for a scheduled interview," she said calmly. "I have a 2:00 with Marlene Jacobs." Amber clicked her tongue and crossed her arms. "Well, it's 1:47, so why don't you take a seat and try not to scare off any paying customers?" Chad leaned forward, mock serious. "Unless you want to start cleaning now, we've got a real mess in the men's room." Their laughter rippled again, louder this time, earning uncomfortable glances from a few nearby patrons. Still, no one intervened. Rachel nodded politely, refusing to let them see the sting behind her silence. She turned and walked toward a small booth near the window. As she passed, Chad called after her, "Hope you brought a pen," I hear we're real picky about toilet cleaning technique. Rachel didn't turn around. She set her folder down carefully on the table, sat and stared out the window, trying to focus on the wide expanse of red rock and desert instead of the snickering behind her. Moments later, a young mother entered, juggling a toddler and a tray of food. As she reached for a napkin dispenser, the tray slipped, sending fries and a half-eaten burger crashing to the floor. Her child began to cry, overwhelmed. Before any of the staff could move, none of whom looked interested, Rachel was already kneeling on the tile, gently scooping up fries and crumpled wrappers. "It's okay, little one," she said, her voice soft. "Spills happen." She offered the mother a warm, reassuring smile. "Don't worry, I've got it." Amber leaned over the counter, watching with disdain. "Wow," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Natural janitor instincts." Eli cracked up. "Hire her on the spot." Chad wiped his hands and rolled his eyes. "She's already doing half the job. Let's just pay her in leftover fries." In the corner booth, Douglas Reed's jaw clenched. He noted every word, every sneer, every act of small, calculated cruelty. His coffee had gone cold, but his attention burned hot. He had come to observe a restaurant. Instead, he was witnessing a lesson in character, both the lack of it and the quiet strength of someone who deserved far better. As the afternoon sun cast long golden streaks across the cracked tile floor of the Copper Rose Diner, Rachel sat quietly in her booth, her eyes downcast but alert. The taunts still rang in her ears, but she didn't let them shape her posture. She straightened the papers inside her folder with careful precision, taking slow breaths to center herself. Though humiliation had arrived before her interview, Rachel remained composed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted a page labeled Recommendation Letter. Sylvia Lang, but she blinked back any emotion that might betray her. She couldn't afford to falter. Not now. At the counter, the teens continued their one-act comedy at her expense, louder this time, as if testing the limits of what the customers around them would tolerate. "Maybe she thinks if she acts nice enough, we'll let her stay," Eli muttered, leaning across the counter. "I give her 1 week before she burns out." Chad chuckled. "She's got that starving college student energy. Can't tell if she's here to apply or beg." Amber smirked, but said nothing this time, scrolling on her phone as though Rachel's presence wasn't worth more attention. The bell above the door jingled again. An elderly couple stepped in, he with a cane, she with trembling hands. As they made their way to a booth, the man's cane caught the edge of a chair, sending a glass of water toppling across their table. The old woman gasped as the water spilled onto her purse, and the man struggled to steady himself. Before anyone behind the counter could react, before most even registered what had happened, Rachel was there. She stood, crossed the room without a word, and grabbed a stack of napkins from the service station. She knelt beside the couple with quiet reassurance. "Let me help you," she said, gently blotting the spill from the purse, the table, and the man's sleeve. The old man offered a sheepish thanks. Rachel smiled. "No trouble at all. I'm glad I was nearby." She returned to her seat without fanfare. No one applauded, no one thanked her but them. Yet her actions rippled through the diner in a silent, unseen way, touching everyone who noticed, even if they pretended not to. Including the man in the flannel booth, who sat motionless, his gaze fixed on her with growing interest. Douglas Reed didn't just see potential anymore, he saw principle, and in a world increasingly loud with cruelty, it was Rachel's quiet decency that stood out the most. At exactly 2:11 p.m., the door to the manager's office swung open, and out stepped Marlene Jacobs. Mid-40s some, no nonsense, and tired in the way only restaurant managers truly understood. She scanned the diner with a clipboard tucked under one arm, and a Bluetooth headset still clinging to one ear. Her gaze landed on Rachel by the window, then flicked toward the counter where the 3 teens leaned lazily against the register. Her brow furrowed. "Rachel Grayson?" she called out. Rachel stood quickly, clutching her folder and smoothing her oversized hoodie. "Yes, ma'am." To the utter shock of everyone, especially Chad, Eli, and Amber, Marlene's stern expression immediately melted into a warm, almost maternal smile. "Oh, sweetheart, there you are," she said, crossing the diner with open arms. Without hesitation, she embraced Rachel tightly, as if greeting an old friend. "I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. My call ran over." She turned to glare at the teens. "And it looks like nobody thought to tell me you'd arrive." Rachel smiled nervously. "It's okay, really." But the tension in the air was already shifting. Patrons at nearby tables looked up. Eli stiffened behind the drink station. Amber froze mid-scroll, her thumb hovering in place. Chad's jaw hung slightly open. The mood had changed, and not in their favor. "I've been looking forward to this meeting," Marlene said, still smiling. "Sylvia Lang from Flagstaff couldn't stop raving about you. Said you were her best team lead in 5 years. And when Mr. Reed himself flagged your name for our new flagship location, I knew I had to meet you in person." Very much like a stone into a still pond. From his booth in the corner, Douglas Reed didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of his now cold coffee, watching the realization ripple across the teens' faces. Chad glanced toward the man in the flannel. Eli mouthed, "No way." Amber's lips parted, and her eyes darted to the table, where Rachel had left her folder, now clearly holding far more than they had assumed. Marlene continued, guiding Rachel to a booth far from the counter. "We'll talk over your promotion materials in a second, but I have to say, the way you handled that spill earlier, very telling. That's the kind of leadership we want in this company." The teens behind the counter exchanged panicked glances. Their smirks were gone, replaced by something new. Fear. The girl they had ridiculed wasn't just a job seeker. She was someone important, and someone had been watching. The diner buzzed with a strange new energy, one that hadn't been there 30 minutes ago, when Rachel Grayson first walked through the door. At the counter, Chad shifted uncomfortably, trying to look busy by wiping down a spotless surface. Eli's eyes darted between the booth and the kitchen window, while Amber bit her thumbnail, her phone now forgotten. In the far booth, Douglas Reed set down his coffee cup with a soft but deliberate clink. He adjusted the sleeves of his flannel shirt, stood slowly, and stepped away from his seat with an ease that belied the storm gathering behind his calm expression. No longer just a background figure sipping diner brew. He now carried the weight of quiet authority in every movement. He walked toward the counter, pausing briefly at the beverage station. "Excuse me," he said to Chad, who glanced over with visible irritation, not yet connecting the dots. "Could I get a refill on my coffee?" Chad huffed, not bothering to hide his annoyance. "It's self-serve," he muttered, jerking his thumb toward the pots without even making eye contact. "Help yourself." Douglas didn't move. His voice, calm but edged with unmistakable command, followed. "I think you'll want to handle this one personally." Something in his tone, cool, measured, unmistakably serious, made all 3 teens look up. Really look. Eli blinked, Amber's brows furrowed, Chad's eyes narrowed. Slowly, as though performing a mental jigsaw puzzle, recognition began to dawn. And then, deliberately, Douglas pulled back the hood of his flannel jacket. At that same moment, Marlene turned from the back booth and spotted him. Her face lit up, not with surprise, but with reverence. "Mr. Reed," she called across the diner, voice rising above the muted conversation and kitchen noise. "Perfect timing." The name hit the 3 teens like a thunderclap. Eli took a step back from the counter. Amber's eyes widened in horror. Chad's jaw visibly tensed. "That's the owner?" he whispered to Amber, but she was too stunned to respond. Douglas offered a polite nod to Marlene, then turned back to the counter. He gave each teen a long, deliberate look, the kind that dissects more than it reveals. "I was going to stay quiet," he said, voice calm but steely. "Just observe. But after what I've witnessed here today, silence isn't an option." Across the diner, a phone camera lifted discreetly. Someone was already recording. Douglas gestured toward Rachel, who sat unaware of the growing storm behind her. That young woman showed more grace and leadership in an hour than some employees show in a year. "And you 3? We need to have a conversation." The Copper Rose diner fell into a hush. Even the low hum of kitchen equipment seemed to fade as Douglas Reed turned from the counter and faced the 3 teens directly. His gaze was steady, his voice quiet but unwavering, a tone that demanded attention without ever needing to be raised. "Chad Brewer, Eli Carter, Amber Shaw," he began, naming them with a clarity that made each one flinch. "Do you know who I am?" They nodded slowly, eyes down. "And do you know who she is?" He gestured toward Rachel, who now stood beside Marlene, confusion giving way to understanding as she realized the man from the booth wasn't just another customer. "That," Douglas continued, "is the candidate personally selected by me to manage our new flagship diner, someone who has shown leadership, empathy, and grace under pressure." Chad's mouth opened. "Sir, we didn't—" But Douglas held up a hand. "Don't, not yet." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "Let's review, shall we?" He glanced down. "Bet she lives in her car. Maybe we should charge her for water. Already cleaning floors, janitor material." With each quote, Amber winced and Eli's shoulders sank. Chad stood still, rigid. "And those were just the lines I had time to write down," Douglas added, tucking the paper away. "I didn't hear a single one of you step in to stop the others, not one." A customer nearby muttered, "Damn right," under his breath. Another nodded, visibly shaken by what they had overheard. A phone camera continued to roll from a booth in the corner, its owner now openly filming. Douglas ignored it. "In my 30 years of running restaurants, I've seen poor customer service. I've seen staff make mistakes, but I have never seen such deliberate cruelty from employees towards someone they assumed was beneath them." Marlene looked stricken. "Mr. Reed, I take full responsibility for not coming out sooner." "This is not on you," Douglas said gently. "This is on them, and it ends today." He turned to Chad and Eli. "You're both terminated, effective immediately. Turn in your uniforms and name badges before you leave." Chad opened his mouth, maybe to beg, maybe to deflect, but saw the finality in Douglas's expression and said nothing. Eli nodded, throat tight, and quietly unpinned his name tag. Douglas's tone softened slightly as he looked at Amber. "You participated, but I also noticed you stayed quiet when the worst things were said. You didn't laugh the loudest, so I'm offering you a choice." Amber looked up, mascara smudged, hope flickering behind tears. "You can quit today, or you can transfer to our Flagstaff location for 3 months of retraining. Under Miss Grayson's supervision." The offer hung in the air, a lifeline extended across a chasm of shame. Amber didn't hesitate. "I'll go. I'll do it." "Johnson," Douglas gave a single, sharp nod, "then make it count." With the weight of judgment now behind them, the energy in the diner shifted again, this time to something quieter, more reverent. Douglas turned away from the teens and back to Rachel, who stood composed but visibly overwhelmed, her hand still clutching the manila folder that had once been the object of mockery. "Miss Grayson," he said, his tone softening, "if it's all right with you, I'd like to return to the purpose of our meeting." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope, worn at the corners but clearly important. "This contains your official offer. We had discussed a management role, but after what I've seen today, how you carry yourself, how you treat people, I've made some additions." Rachel hesitated before taking the envelope, glancing nervously at Marlene, who gave her an encouraging nod. She opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned the page, and then again. Her breath caught. This is more than we talked about," she said, looking up at Douglas in disbelief. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Douglas replied with a warm smile. "The position is yours, general manager of the new flagship Copper Rose location downtown. Starting salary has been increased. You'll also receive full benefits and a relocation stipend." He paused, lowering his voice just slightly. "And the apartment we're providing has 2 bedrooms. I understand you've been caring for your mother." Rachel's eyes welled up with tears, though she blinked quickly to keep them from falling. "How did you—" "Sylvia from Flagstaff mentioned it," he said gently. "Tell me how you took double shifts during the holidays to pay for her medication. How you sent half your paycheck home every week." A hush fell over the diner again, but this time it wasn't the silence of tension. It was reverence. A few customers watched with soft smiles, some even nodding quietly in admiration. Rachel looked down at the offer again, her voice trembling. "I accept." Douglas extended his hand. "Welcome to the future, Rachel." She shook it firmly, and for the first time since she had walked through that creaky door, Rachel Grayson allowed herself to truly smile. Not the kind you wear to survive a moment, but the kind that rises from something deeper. Hope, worth, and the promise that the hard road behind her had finally led to something more than survival. It had led to purpose. 6 months later, the Copper Rose Diner looked like a completely different place, not just on the outside, where new signage and fresh paint gave it a glow-up, but from within, where something far deeper had shifted. The morning sun streamed through spotless windows, glinting off polished chrome stools and newly laminated menus. A gentle hum of conversation filled the space, the kind born of regulars who felt welcome and newcomers who instantly sensed they were in good hands. At the center of it all was Rachel Grayson, dressed in a crisp Navy manager's uniform, her name tag gleaming proudly over her heart. She moved through the diner with quiet confidence, checking plates as they left the kitchen, greeting customers by name and coaching staff with gentle firmness that earned respect, not fear. Where once there had been mocking laughter and indifference, there was now camaraderie and care. Amber Shaw, the former hostess who had taken the retraining offer, now stood behind the counter as a reliable shift supervisor. Her once overly polished appearance had been traded for more grounded professionalism, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, and a genuine smile as she helped an elderly veteran settle into his booth. Under Rachel's mentorship, Amber had grown not just into the role, but into someone her coworkers could depend on. The walls of the diner told their own story. Framed certificates of community service and employee recognition lined the entryway. Near the register, a simple plaque hung beside the specials board. It read, "True character is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you." Beneath it, in smaller script, "In honor of Rachel Grayson, who leads with dignity." It had been a gift from Douglas Reed at the grand reopening, a reminder to everyone, customer and staff alike, of the moment that had changed everything. Douglas still visited from time to time, always unannounced. He would sit at the same corner booth with his coffee and watch, not to test, but to witness the kind of leadership he believed in. And every time he left, he did so with a smile, knowing that this small roadside diner had become the blueprint for what his entire company would strive to become. Rachel, now balancing her management role with online classes to finish her degree, no longer moved like someone waiting to prove her worth. She had proven it, and now she was building something lasting, a place where second chances weren't just given, but grown. The bell above the Copper Coast Diner door jingled just as the lunch rush was winding down. Rachel looked up from her clipboard at the host stand, her practiced eye quickly scanning the entering figure. He was taller than she remembered, though thinner, and his clothes, secondhand slacks and a button-up, were neatly pressed. His hair, once messy and dyed at the tips, was now trimmed short, and his posture carried a quiet humility. Eli Carter stood just inside the doorway, clutching a worn manila envelope labeled Application Custodian. It had been 6 months since she'd seen him, and if not for the solemn look in his eyes, Rachel might not have recognized him at all. Emma, one of the younger new hires, approached him and led him toward the back office. Rachel waited inside, standing as he entered. "Miss Grayson," he said respectfully, offering a slight bow of his head, "thank you for seeing me." She gestured for him to sit, keeping her expression neutral but open. "I read your letter," she said, placing a single sheet of handwritten paper on the desk between them. "I appreciate the honesty and the courage it took to send it." Eli nodded slowly. "What happened that day? It changed everything. I thought I was just being funny trying to fit in. But I saw the video afterward. I saw myself, really saw myself, and I didn't like who I was becoming." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't expect a job. I just needed you to know I've been trying to be better." Rachel studied him for a moment, weighing not just his words, but his sincerity. Then she slid a document across the table. "This is a probationary contract, 3 months as a custodian, starting at minimum wage. You'll report to our facilities lead and receive weekly performance evaluations. Any disrespect, any shortcuts, and it ends there. Understood?" Eli's hands trembled slightly as he took the paper. "Understood, and thank you for even considering me." Rachel gave a small, measured smile. "Second chances aren't gifts, Eli. They're earned. Let's see what you do with yours." As he left to complete onboarding paperwork with HR, Rachel watched him go with a mix of caution and hope. Out in the dining room, Amber caught her eye and gave a small, knowing nod. She understood what it meant to be trusted again, and now someone else would have the chance to learn the same. The afternoon light filtered softly through the windows of the Copper Rose diner, casting warm amber hues across the booths and polished countertops. Business had slowed to a gentle hum after the lunch crowd, and Rachel Grayson used the lull to tidy up near the register. As she turned to refill the napkin dispensers, her eye caught on a familiar scene, one that pulled at something deep inside her. In the same booth she had once waited in, nervously clutching her folder, sat a young woman hunched over an application form. Her jacket was too thin for the season, her jeans frayed at the hem. She was chewing the end of a borrowed pen, her brows drawn in concentration and anxiety. A plastic grocery bag sat beside her with what looked like all her belongings. The sight struck Rachel with quiet recognition. Without hesitation, Rachel walked over, softening her expression as she approached. "Hey there," she said gently. The young woman looked up, startled, her hand flying to cover the form as if expecting to be scolded. "Don't worry," Rachel added quickly. "You're doing just fine." She set a glass of water on the table. "On the house? You looked like you could use it." The girl blinked, unsure. "Really? I mean, thank you. You don't have to explain," Rachel said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I'm Rachel. I manage this place." The girl nodded, still cautious. "I'm Heather Lane." "Well, Heather," Rachel said with a smile, "when you finish that application, bring it to me personally. I like to meet everyone myself." She stood, resting her hand on the table briefly. "And just so you know, you're not the first person to sit in this booth hoping for something better. I was once right where you are." Across the room, Ember watched from the counter, a soft smile tugging at her lips. She exchanged a glance with Eli, who was sweeping near the door. He paused, following Rachel's gaze toward Heather, and nodded silently. He knew the look of someone needing a lifeline. Outside, parked under the shade of a lone sycamore tree, Douglas Reed sat in his truck, sipping coffee from a to-go cup. Through the diner's window, he watched Rachel's interaction unfold, the cycle of grace repeating. A small smile crossed his face as he whispered to no one in particular, "That's leadership." He started the engine and drove off, knowing the lesson had taken root and was already being passed on.